Welcome to this edition of the Monitoring Bootcamp. In this edition, we're going to cover how to extend application insights to Power Apps Canvas apps. We're going to cover standalone Canvas app. We'll cover embedded Canvas app, even look at custom pages. We'll look at some of the telemetry that's provided from the Canvas app out of the box, how to provide that telemetry to app insights using the trace and trace severity and those kind of functions within. So we'll look at that. We'll run some Custo queries to understand what exactly is going on. We'll also look at the monitor tool so we can start debugging and kind of putting the pieces together, going from what's delivered with App Insights to what's delivered in the monitoring tool and sort of bringing that together to help with troubleshooting. Enjoy. Session objectives. Today we're going to look at how to understand how to get instrumentation key, learn what events are collected within Canvas apps natively, and how to collect events within a Canvas app and how to debug. My name is Ali Yousefi. I am a senior customer engineer with Microsoft. My certifications include Azure Solution Architect, Dynamics 365 Power Platform, as well as Azure DevOps Engineer Experts. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. Microsoft Services offers a monitoring workshop that will allow you to work with Microsoft engineers to help implement a monitoring strategy for Power Platform and Microsoft Dataverse. Note, this title may change in the future, but please contact your Microsoft representative for any additional information if you're interested in pursuing this workshop. Let's take a look at how to get the Azure Application Insights instrumentation key. So what is the Azure Application Insights instrumentation key? Well, it helps us connect our application to App Insights. We'll be using this instrumentation key, providing it to our Power Apps Canvas apps within the app properties itself. This will let Power Apps send that telemetry to the correct App Insights resource. You can also use some of the solution package or some of the DevOps tool sets to review and actually extract the app manifest and review this property and store that and update it as needed. So let's look at a quick overview of Power Apps Canvas apps. Power Apps Canvas apps represent a no or low-code approach to building and delivering modern applications for makers. The requirements of knowing programming languages such as C# have been removed, allowing makers of virtually any background to build apps. These apps can be used with hundreds of connectors, allowing for a flexible user interface layered on top of data sources. Apps can also be generated from data sources automatically, allowing you to quickly create and deploy an application to your team or customers. You can start with data from Dataverse, OneDrive, SharePoint, Excel, or other first-party connectors. You can also start with a template or a blank app to quickly begin building. Before we begin, I'd like to point out that the majority of this content is also available on the Monitoring the Power Platform series. There's 3 articles that this is pulled from, including Getting Started with Application Insights, the Monitoring Tool, and Auditing and Activity Logs Part 2. Let's take a look at how we can collect events. Before we talk about how to capture events, let's talk about what can be monitored. Well, we can start with native Canvas apps. We can also go into embedded Canvas apps within Dynamics 365. Within native and embedded Canvas apps, we can look at connectors. So all the connectors we have from first-party connectors such as Dataverse, SharePoint, Excel, to third-party or even custom connectors we have available to us. The Azure Application Insights feature for Power Apps Canvas apps allows us to capture lots of information about user activity within our app. User activities can show us information such as how many users have viewed the app, how many sessions have created by users, in fact even individual users from the app. The number of events logged for the app, such as user navigation. What operating system and browser version are they using? And where are they located geographically? What region and location are they? The pictures below show how to set up the Application Insights feature. Now this may change from when you're viewing this, but for now, go to the app properties, find the instrumentation key field, and populate with your instrumentation key from your Application Insights resource. So what's delivered out of the box once we enable the Application Insights feature? Well, we'll have custom events, which will show that the app has been started. So we see the Power Apps client published app info on start name in the bottom here. We can show the page view, which is the navigation. So, once an app has been launched, normally it's going to go to some landing page. So we'll see that as the page view table. For traces, we'll have traces out of the box traces will show that we've loaded the app using this either web player dynamic preload index, or we might even see the hashed resource depending if we're running it as an embedded Canvas app. All right, so say we want to add our own custom telemetry or instrumentation within our Canvas app. Well, the way we can do that is using the trace method. The trace method gives us 3 different parameters that we can leverage, one that's required, 2 that are optional. The required is a message that's going to go to the message column within traces. This can be a string, and for tests specifically, this will create a record in the traces table in the test case result record. For trace severity and custom record, these are both optional. The trace severity is where we could say, hey, we want this to be an informational versus warning or error critical. Depending on how you set that up, that can impact any sort of alerts downstream. So be mindful of how you would determine what is considered, say, a information warning versus an error critical, and we'll cover that here in a little bit. Finally, the custom record allows us to add custom data that will be recorded in App Insights. This will be populated in the custom dimensions table, and we'll look at examples of how to populate that here in a second. Let's take a look at how we can debug Power Apps Canvas apps. So the first thing we can do once we've wired up Application Insights is to look at adding trace statements within our Canvas app. One thing we have the ability to do is to extend our trace statements to include custom dimensions. Custom dimensions can really include anything you want, from hard-coded strings to information from, say, the app or user variables within Power Apps. And that's important that we understand how we can help enrich our data points by adding context. So looking at the app variable, for instance, includes things like the current screen that we're on, the height and the width. For the user, what's their email address, what's the full name of it, for instance. Assigning appropriate severity. This is going to be important, because as we start looking at setting up alerts for our Canvas app, we're going to want to have specific severity levels. Severity levels can range from information to warning to critical to error. These will turn into integers within the traces table, going from 1 to 4. When we start looking at our alerts, we're most likely going to want to alert users when there's a high criticality, high error. If it's informational, we may also want to just simply notify or just keep track of that. So making sure we assign appropriate severity. For error versus critical, it's important to distinguish the difference between the error is going to be something that would not be a sort of a blocking issue. So we could have, maybe we expected data returned from a data set, but we didn't get this. A critical issue could be something like, I'm performing an action that I expect to create a record within a database, create for instance, when we're doing the return to work application, create a request to return to the building. If that doesn't happen, then we definitely want to notify support, maybe even notify a live agent, as well as track that information within App Insights so that we can now run an alert on it as well. Finally, we want to use it to help determine how we can capture errors from data sources. So let's take a look here. On the right, we have 2 trace messages, one with a warning and one with an error. So we see we have the trace with some sort of string. In this case, it's just an inside embedded app form screen one. The second value is actually the severity, right? So there's trace severity of warning, and then the second one you see trace severity of error. Once you go into the third parameter, that's where it gets interesting. That's where we start adding our context that goes into our custom dimensions. So in this case, I've added a control to say what control am I on. In this case, I'm on the form screen, the on visible. If I was on a control, say a text box or a button, I may want to put the name of the button that I'm in the method that I'm in on select. For the screen, you have the app object itself. It has a property called active screen that has the name. So instead of having to hard code the form screen 1, for instance, you could simply use the app active screen name. Some other things I think is important is capturing the height and width of how it's rendering so that you better understand if a user is complaining that maybe a control is not being shown. How did it look when they were rendering it, for instance. The next one you see is an error. So in this case, what we're doing is we're using the if error method. We're running just some formula that's going to throw an error. In our case, if it is thrown, then we're going to fall back to the trace method. So we're going to throw an error with data source error and then the different controls again. As you can see, the last property within the final parameter is an error. We have the first error.message. That also includes things like details and source as well. So familiarize yourself with the if error, the is blank or error, as well as the is error, as well as how the errors look when they're returned. There's also an errors sort of table that you can loop through as well to produce any of those to App Insights. To help with debugging Power Apps Canvas apps, we have a tool called the Monitor tool. The Monitor tool will show actions performed by a user, such as opening an app, navigating between screens, clicking on controls, any sort of user action. In fact, each keystroke is captured as a user action entry, so we can see wait times and data inputs between keystrokes to help analyze kind of how long a form may be being utilized or how long a user is on a particular form. We may look to see how a user is interacting with the form, if they're tabbing a certain order, if they're neglecting certain controls. The Monitor tool also has a very useful feature at the top that allows us to filter by time, by category, by operation result. We can sort, we can filter. The category field specifically will be useful as well as the result, but the category shows us things such as screen loads, so that'll show operations such as loading a screen, navigating to a screen, user actions, so selecting, invoking controls. Also can review connections with Power Automate or data source connections directly, so you could see the payloads that are being sent across, as well as how long did the payload take. You could see each formula that's being used, and how those are being invoked by the different connectors or by a user action. Let's take a look at some techniques to debug embedded Canvas apps. When users interact with your embedded Power App Canvas app, they may run into particular errors or have questions regarding the rendering of the app, for instance. One trick you can do with support is to inform users on how they can collect session IDs, as well as collect the page source URL for additional troubleshooting. To collect the session ID, have the user hold down the Alt key and right click on their mouse. You'll see a session details pop up, and session details, when clicked, will show not only the session ID, but the Power Apps version as shown in the slide here. The session ID doesn't necessarily correlate to the session ID within Dynamics 365 as shown in the top left of this slide. What it can do, though, is help us sort of find the event once we've had App Insights configured within this Canvas app. So one thing we can do is look towards how can we kind of determine how to get started with this session detail that we show here with the session ID, and find out how this will correlate to our embedded app, which we will have from Dynamics 365. When looking at the telemetry within App Insights for Power Apps Canvas apps, one thing we want to look for is how to determine if this is a Canvas app that's, say, embedded within Dynamics, or if this is a standalone Canvas app being used on a mobile device, workstation, etc. One thing you can look at is the page view record within Application Insights. The URL of the page view, if it's a embedded Canvas app, will include some additional query string parameters, which you can confirm. The query string parameters would look something like PARAMQS, as well as model driven. This will provide the context from the Dynamics 365 record into the Power App Canvas app. So you can run a query in Kusto looking for URL that contains model driven. This should hopefully filter down to the specific page views that came from a Canvas app. Let's take a look at an example. So here we have a Dynamics 365 form that has a embedded Canvas app in it. To view the page frame source, what we want to do is right-click within the embedded Canvas app. We'll get prompted from our browser with different options, including View Frame Source, which we'll want to have the user click on. Once they click on it, they can look for a URL and specifically look for something like model-driven form integration or correlation ID is highlighted in this image. You can see at the top in the URL, this is a source for this Power App here. So we have the apps.powerapps.com play with the identifiers for this particular one. Within here, we have a correlation ID of 9A750B0, etc. So we can have the user either capture this entire source or at least capture this URL here, including the correlation ID. This will correlate to the page view record we have here. This is the URL field within the page view table. You can see the same model-driven form integration as well as the correlating 9A750B0. So this here would help us to help determine which events were coming from this user's interaction with the Canvas app. Now, as part of our demo we're about to do, we're going to look at using both this page view source, where this is useful if a user was just interacting without support and they ran into an issue. This is something where we could help train the user to understand, okay, when you run into something, here's the minimal steps needed to help support. We're also going to then look at running the monitor tool in conjunction with a user session to see how that changes some of the data points that are delivered to App Insights to better understand what we're doing and help troubleshoot. Now we'll perform a demo of monitoring Canvas apps with App Insights and the monitor tool. Okay, let's take a look at a Power App Canvas app. In this case here, we can see that this is a embedded Canvas app by locating the model-driven form integration object here. You also see that it has a single screen called Form Screen 1, and it has a couple of galleries as well as a form with a data card, a couple of data cards in it. So we'll start off with the app object here. If you go to the right, you can see there's properties, advanced, and ideas. On properties, this is where we can add our instrumentation key from Application Insights. And just for a refresher, to get the instrumentation key, just go to the overview within your App Insights and collect your instrumentation key there. All right. So we're back here, instrumentation key has been set, and it will now set up the default App Insights messages, such as the custom event showing us the app has started, the page view for the form screen, and the traces to show that, again, that the user has invoked this Canvas app. So that's out of the box. What you can do is add in some additional tracing. So in this case here, I have the form, I have the on visible, so essentially when the form opens, let's expand this and take a look here. So here's an example of adding informational trace. So in this case here, I use the trace method. I have a string. I'm doing information from, and I'm using the app object. You can see the app object has a few extra properties here. And in my case, I'm doing ActiveScreen.name. You can do other properties as well of the screen, such as content, language, name, orientation, background image, etc. So in this case, we'll just put back the name here. We're going to now have the severity, trace severity. If we look here, we have different options. We have information. Let's see if we can make this do it. I was hoping to see that. Okay, well, in this case, it's not doing it, but we have the trace information here. There we go. Let's see, maybe that'll help. There we go. So information, critical, error, as well as warning. So in our case, we're going to choose information. And it'll hide the trace severity once we move off this. Here's our custom records. We have to add the brackets to it and treat it sort of like a JSON control. So in my case, I'm adding, you can add whatever dimensions you want. In my case, I'm adding something called control to say this is where this message is coming from. The method where it's being invoked, and then some additional properties for context. So the screen, in my case, app.activeScreen.name, and the app height and width. And you can add additional, again, whatever you really want in this piece here. So this is an example of a simple information. You can add additional ones for warning and error and so forth. So error, what's interesting is that we have the if error we can leverage. We also have the ability to look at errors within a particular data source. So in this case here, let's go find a better one, accounts. So if accounts has errors, we can find the first one and actually set the error within our custom JSON and be able to send that to the custom dimensions. So we have all of this here on the form on load. This can also be put in different objects. So for instance, on this select of the button, I can again look for any error messages. I can also simply add a information if I want, right? So trace user clicked button 1. And it can be as simple as that. And text input and has different ones. So for instance, text input, we have on change and so forth. We can all capture there. So that's going to help us as we have the embedded piece of it. While we're building this to debug it, on the left-hand side, you'll see a couple of tools here. If you click on this and hit Open Monitor, you'll now have the monitor session open. So when you're sort of debugging this, you can hit play here and sort of click on buttons, type in some stuff, and we should see, if we go back, user actions. So I clicked on, it did on select of the button, did text input, I input some text here. If I click on a single one of these, I could see here's the text I put in. For the user action, and see the formula here, and when the user was done. And if I want, I can filter on certain things. For instance, user actions, or maybe I want to do button 1. Find the button 1 here. Close that. There we go, button 1. And you can download and upload as needed here. So that's pretty much for debugging this, adding the trace and adding the monitor. So once we've added it, we want to definitely save and publish, and we'll publish it. So while this is publishing, we're actually going to go back to Power Apps here. If you wanted to monitor, you can run monitor directly from UCI. You can also add a query string parameter to monitor here. Once you have monitor turned on the model-driven app, you'll see a bunch of information suddenly flow in here, including the JavaScript calls for web resources, any XHRs going out and so forth, XHR here, so on. In our case, we want to look for asset load.iframe. Remember, this is for embedded Canvas app. So asset load.iframe, we see our data source here, and we can pinpoint it by using apps.powerapps.com, play, and then whatever this identifier would be. In our case, we could see that we have a session ID and activity ID. So this one, our session is AE569. So if we go to the About, we also see the AE569. And for our Canvas app, which is here, we see a session ID of 143 CD67, etc. with the Power Apps version here. Let's take a look at App Insights. Actually, before we do that, let's look at how to get the page source. So if you click within, you can view page source, and you'll see. So I searched for model, and I have model-driven form integration with this correlation ID, which you can see is 6AD8F, so forth, right? So we have that, we have this, we had our one here, AE. So we have 3 identifiers. Let's go back to App Insights now. Okay, so now we're in App Insights. You'll see here I'm doing a union on the traces, page views, and custom events. These are the three different tables that we push to with Canvas app. In my case, I'm running a where clause. We're running a session ID equal to this 32-digit GUID. That one came from the embedded Canvas app as shown here. So if you have a user who is saying that they have an issue with the Canvas app and something's not refreshing, something's not submitting correctly, have them hold down the Alt key and right click. I'll close this and start it over. And you should see a session details. Session details will get you the session ID, which you can then go here and search on session ID. Now this will work when the monitoring tool is open. When the monitoring tool is not open, the session ID actually doesn't flow the same way. So I'll show you that here in a bit. But for now, just take a look at what we have. We have the custom event showing that the app has been opened here with the session ID and everything else going on. You can see what OS, what we're running as browser, and where we're at, and what version of Edge in this case here. And here's the app on start. We have a couple of traces, the app started, and the page view, which is my my page here. And here I can see the app name, MS app name, the ID, which is the Canvas app record in Dataverse. We have the app session ID and the current screen index with the screen name and how long the duration was for that, and is it a test and so forth here. Here's some of my traces. So a warning will be of severity level 2, information of 1, and error of 3. And you can see with each one of these, with the custom dimensions I added, I now have them here. So app height, app width, control, method, screen, app name, etc. So I have so much information here, as well as any error messages that I may want to capture in here. Error message. So you can capture the error message as well and send that to App Insights. So that's doing a severity level and so forth. Let's go take a look at when you don't have the monitor tool open up. So we're gonna go ahead and run. Let's just do traces over the last. Let's do hour. See if there's any. No, let's do 4 hour then. So we could see something interesting. This is when we have the monitor tool open. We get the nice 32-digit GUID that matches with session ID. But sometimes you don't necessarily have that. So you see these session IDs that aren't the GUIDs. So what you can do for that is go look at the actual page view and get the URL. So if I want to get the page view and I go back and I see, okay, like some of these have it and some don't. For the ones that don't, like the second record here, I can look at the URL. Remember, go find the correlating ID, which is going to be somewhere here. Here we go. And if the user collected the source as we showed before, we should be able to map that to that URL as well. But if not, you have that correlating ID and you have the session ID as well. So even without the monitor tool, we still have some ability to look and see what's going on here. So we could, once you get this session ID, you can do something like this and see your different custom events and traces. So all of the stuff is still here. Our session ID a little bit different, but still captures all the same events that we had. Finally, if I want to take some of this information here, I can quickly add a Custo query, and then if I want to export it to Power BI, I can do that as well. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so if you go to the Monitoring the Power Platform at Canvas Apps, Getting Started with Application Insights article, if you scroll about halfway down, you can see useful Custo queries. We'll have some information here showing how to pull the MS app identifier, pulling page views within same session, and even slow performing pages or screens. So let's see what this one actually will do for us. So we're going to create a new query and run this. And we can see which ones were actually taking the longest. That's a pie chart. We can see this one took 324 milliseconds. So not too bad. So there's page view here. If I want to export to Power BI, I can say export to Power BI. It'll download a text file that I can put into Power BI desktop and then push that out. And that's documented in the documentation from Microsoft regarding App Insights and Canvas app. So that covers this demo. Thank you. To sort of wrap everything up here, so connecting App Insights and Monitor Tool. Here's a screenshot of the Monitor Tool, including the apps.powerapps.com URL. You can grab the session ID here on the bottom right. You can also look at the correlating ID within the data source here on line number 4. Next, you could also look at the settings about page, get that session ID, which can help us when we have the App Insights set up for Dataverse. We can kind of connect that information from the form load, which actually shows a lot of the information from Monitor Tool as well. We can get the embedded Canvas app session ID by holding down the Alt right clicking on the mouse and collecting the session ID. Finally, we can use the App Insights page view record to get the correlating ID that you see here. Together, remember the Monitor Tool is going to show us the same session ID we see here on the About page, and it's going to give us the correlation ID that will tie to App Insights page view. If we have the embedded Canvas app on, that will also with Monitor Tool, that will also give us the session ID we need for App Insights. So that about wraps it up for extending application insights into PowerApps Canvas apps. Again, we've covered how to implement application insights, how to add trace statements, how to extend using custom dimensions, adding additional context, as well as how to debug with the Monitor Tool. Hope this has been helpful. You'll find my contact information on the bottom right-hand corner. Please do not hesitate to reach out, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.